The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to those expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the OSIP Foundation Incorporated or any other group or individual. This podcast may contain dialogue or subject material that could be considered for mature audiences only. All aspects of How You Play the Game and the OSIP Foundation Incorporated are protected by copyright and other state and federal intellectual property laws. Unauthorized use without the express written consent of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated is strictly prohibited. If you're interested in sponsoring How You Play the Game, please email us at podcast@osipfoundation.org. Your sponsorship may be tax deductible. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of How You Play the Game, the official podcast of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, with you as we talk about what's going on as far as the world of sportsmanship is concerned. This is the first episode of the month of July. The year is 2026. Glad you can be with us. As always, check us out online at osipfoundation.org. You can contact the show using the email address podcast@osipfoundation.org. On the socials, we're at facebook.com/osipfoundation, X and Instagram at OSIP Foundation, hashtag How You Play the Game. It's been a little while since we spoke. Took the month of June off unexpectedly. We had our fourth annual celebration on the 31st of May, which was a great success and whatnot. And in the lead up to all of that, we just did not have the time to do an episode for the beginning of June. And then as we were approaching the midpoint of June, I was under the weather. And thankfully I'm fine. I'm just one of those old summer bugs that come through. And, when you think about, how people can get sick and whatnot, this was tame compared to some of the other stuff that I could have had and whatnot. So it was rough because it happened the day that I was supposed to be in a middle school doing an OSIP awards ceremony, and I was just knocked out. It was bad, but it was okay, if that makes any sense at all. It was more unfortunate than anything else, but I'm fine. Just got the old, lingering cough and whatnot, and maybe my voice sounds a little weird, but hey, it is what it is. Fine now, and we can try and get back on schedule with everything a little bit. It's just that how when your life gets turned upside down that way, you start to think like, oh geez, what else can go wrong? And so in the background, I've got the dishwasher going and the air conditioning going. And both of those were replaced in the last God knows how many days, last month or so as all this was happening. So it's all, it is what it is. When it rains, it pours. But we're here. We're going to try and get back on schedule with all of this. And we appreciate your understanding as we try and, get things rolling again on the podcast after a what I'm going to call a well-deserved month off. But here we are, and let's get down to it, all right? So today, there's something that I wanted to discuss. This has been happening for, some time, give or take, and then finally it kind of, boiled over a little bit. And it has to deal with the pitch clock in Major League Baseball. If you are a Yankee fan like I am, you have probably seen Jose Caballero with his routine in order to kind of manipulate the pitch clock. So the pitch clock, if you're not familiar with it, is with nobody on base a 15-second clock, and with runners on base an 18-second clock. And essentially, it's designed to keep the pace of the game moving. So that there's not a lot of downtime in between pitches. It's not necessarily supposed to speed up the game. That is a natural consequence of it, but it's not the intent. It's just meant to keep the action moving. So, the pitcher has to, with nobody on base, the pitcher has to begin his motion to deliver a pitch within 15 seconds of receiving the baseball, or the ball, the timer being started by the umpire if there's a dead ball or something like that. And with runners on base, it's 18 seconds. Very simple, right? So the batter has to be in the box and alert to the pitcher by the time the timer says 8 seconds. That way there's no kind of gamesmanship going on back and forth. So Caballero, who is the utility man for the Yankees, he played shortstop while Volpe was out. He continued to play short while he was out, and now he's kind of rotating around a little bit and gets a fair amount of playing time. His whole argument has been I am going to use all the time I can to get in the box and be alert to the pitcher right as that 8-second mark begins. Okay? And finally, it got to a point where at a game in Toronto during the month of June, umpires essentially warned him. And, you know, the superficial argument is this is just gamesmanship. He's allowed to do this. You know, the umpires were warning the pitchers, saying you got to wait for him to engage before you start your motion and whatnot. And other people are saying, no, this isn't this. You know, he's doing this purposefully. This, you know, he's gaming the system, etc. So, you know, as I'm kind of reading this and watching this live and whatnot, I'm thinking to myself, you know, yeah, this is an unfortunate amount of gamesmanship that should be considered within the rules. But then I get reminded by our friends over at Close Call Sports about a clarification, a specific rule under the heading of the pitch clock that is supposed to prevent this. So when the pitch clock was first implemented, there were two players, Max Scherzer and Wilson Contreras, who were trying to game the system. Scherzer, as a pitcher, was essentially trying to essentially just become set and immediately deliver his pitch the moment that the hitter was alert to him. And Major League Baseball stepped in and said, nope, we're clarifying this. You cannot do that. That is essentially, you know, a quick pitch under the rules of the pitch timer here, and you have to do this normally, okay? Contreras did the opposite, kind of what Caballero was doing. He was trying to bait the pitchers into this, and MLB came out and said, no, can't do that either. So Caballero is like the one person who, after this, you know, these clarifications were issued, who continued to do this. And it was never really a major issue until he really pushed the envelope. He pushed it so far to that 8-second mark that finally they stepped in and said, this can't be done. And in this game in Toronto, what essentially happened was the umpires formally warned him for delaying the game. And if he were to delay the game any further, they would charge him with a strike, which essentially is a pitch clock violation on the part of the batter. And so what they did at Close Call Sports was they reminded everybody of these two specific clarifications and you know, adjudications following the incidents with Scherzer and Contreras to say, no, he actually cannot do this. So I guess what the point that I'm going to try and make here is that anytime anyone in the media says Caballero did nothing wrong, you know, and this is all under the guise of gamesmanship, we now have evidence that shows no, that's not true. MLB actually clarified this. So we have to be able to do our research on this. And you know what? In my initial observation of this rule, you know, before I realized that MLB did clarify this, I'm thinking to myself, you know, yeah, all right, maybe this is just one of those gamesmanship things that we have to accept. And then I realized when this was pointed out to me that, hey, you know, a little research on my part shows that, in fact, no, this was already clarified and he can't do it. It's amazing how announcers and media and whatnot, you know, don't do their homework on this stuff sometimes. You know, and that doesn't mean that, you know, the media is automatically evil, but, you know, it's one of those things where we can easily fall into the trap of going with a majority or formulating an opinion based on influence from other people and other sources without actually having all of the facts in front of us, which kind of is what happens in our everyday lives, regardless of whether it's sports or politics or anything else. You know, so we have here an example in baseball where this narrative is being created, and it's dividing people with Jose Caballero, meaning like, he's allowed to do this. He did nothing wrong, and they're unfairly persecuting him, etc. Blah 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 blah. And here's Close Call Sports coming out saying, actually, if you read the clarification, which is pretty clear, then no, he's not allowed to do this. And now it's an open and shut case. So if you're going to continue to bemoan this, now you're bemoaning a rule that that we shouldn't, that we already have. So don't hate the player, hate the rule. Or in this case, hate the player because he doesn't understand the rule. It's one of those things where you gotta be able to take a step back. You got to be able to look at it objectively. You have to take your ego out of it. You have to consider all of the facts. And if you're going to formulate an opinion following all of this information, make sure that it's one that's going to hold water. And in this case, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze to try and create some sort of opinion that says Jose Caballero is allowed to do this. Because MLB came out and made this clarification. And in the grand scheme of things, is this really worth it? You think about all the things that really matter in life, and is this one of them where you're trying to gain an unfair edge just because it's not like your liberties are being taken from you because of this. You know what I'm saying? You're not being unfairly persecuted, like this is a serious political issue or a societal issue. This is your job is to get in the box, and you're trying to gain an advantage, and they've already made a clarification about this. So why do we continue to harp on it? Does that make sense? I'm sure there are other areas of this that could be considered a bit more gray. I'm sure that there are areas of this where someone who is listening to this might say, well, then what about X? And maybe we can have those conversations. And maybe those conversations will result in us remaining in certain gray areas. Okay, that's fine. It's completely fine. The point I'm trying to make is that in the context of Major League Baseball, for the purposes of anyone within the sound of my voice, let's all take a step back and realize that the league has already clarified this, and Caballero is not allowed to do this. So the more he's going to continue to harp on it, the more he's going to learn the hard way that he can't do this. And I think that, there are players in the league who have to understand that. Like, there are places where you can gain an advantage and places where you can't gain an advantage. When you consider the idea of gamesmanship, which is very much skirting the line of sportsmanship without actually crossing over into poor sportsmanship. And if you read our book on sportsmanship, we actually talk about it a little bit. And there are some great articles, there's some great books on gamesmanship as well that you can check out if you want more information on it. But you can always start with On Sportsmanship, which is available on Amazon now. And in terms of gamesmanship, as long as you remain in that gray area, what are we going to do other than just say, is it illegal? No. Is it immoral? Perhaps. And I always go back to this one example. This was years ago when Joe Madden was managing the Tampa Bay Rays. Derek Jeter was up to bat, and I believe it was Lance Barksdale who was behind the plate. And at the time, I think Barksdale was still a call-up umpire. I could be wrong about that, but he's a crew chief now. But anyway, they're in Tampa. Rays are hosting the Yankees, and Jeter takes a pitch inside that glances off of his hand or the knob of the bat. We can't really tell, but then he acts like it hit his hand. Now, maybe, if you think about holding the bat and having the knob of the bat underneath your left hand as a right-handed hitter, if a ball comes in and hits the knob of the bat, it may not have technically hit you, but it could send shock waves through your hand to make you think like you got hit. It could be uncomfortable. It could be painful, okay? But anyway, the replays, and this is all before instant replay, eventually come to show us that, no, this actually hit the knob of the bat. Barksdale using his interpretation of what he's experiencing, says, okay, that hit his hand, because Jeter is now acting like he got hit in the hand. He's shaking his hand. He's beckoning the trainer and whatnot. So Barksdale calls time, awards him first base. Okay, fine. Trainer checks him out, says, okay, I think you're okay. You feel okay? Yeah, I'm good. He sends him to first base. Madden comes out and starts arguing. And no matter what happens, no matter, they can't go to replay yet. It's not in the rules yet. They say, no, we're standing with the hit by pitch. And Madden eventually gets ejected. And the argument being made at the time was, well, this is gamesmanship. Because let's say Jeter knew he didn't get hit. He's basically saying it's on the umpire to tell me that I did not get hit. You're telling the umpire that he has to do his job. And maybe it was the incorrect call. Okay. Is this immoral? Perhaps. Is it illegal? Did we break a rule here? How thin do we want to slice the bologna here? Should Jeter have done it? Well, if Jeter did this with intent to fool an umpire, then naughty, should not have done that. If Jeter literally thought he had gotten hit because of the shock wave sent through his hand when the bat got hit, okay, I'll buy that. The only person who really knows is Derek Jeter. And, I can't, I'm not going to just call him up and say, hey, Derek, good to talk to you. Did this actually happen? No, I don't have Derek Jeter's phone number, and I don't think Derek Jeter wants to talk to me, even though we both have the same birthday. So the point here is that at what point do we cross the line from gamesmanship into poor sportsmanship? The example with Jeter really skirts that line. The example with Caballero might be a step beyond it. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to say these in terms where I'm definitively saying this is where this falls on this scale and this is where this falls on that scale. I'm just trying to put it into context to get people to understand that there's always going to be additional information out there that we may need before we formulate an opinion, okay? And we need to be able to keep that gray area sometimes in order to have these conversations. Rather than point fingers and say, I'm right, you're wrong. It's, well, what do you think about this? I read this article and this is what I felt. Do you feel the same? Do you feel differently? And whatnot. And to be able to have those conversations in a way where we are not creating boundaries that can't be crossed, if that makes sense. Okay? All I can tell you with definitive certainty is that in this situation with Jose Caballero, the league came out and said, don't do that. And okay, that's where it stops. Shouldn't be any more difficult than that, right? So anyway, that's all for today. Again, glad to be back on the podcast. We hope to talk to you in just a few short weeks. As always, check us out online at osafoundation.org. If you'd like to email the show, even if you just want to say, hey, welcome back, use the address podcast@osafoundation.org. And on the socials, again, facebook.com/osafoundation, X and Instagram @osafoundation, #HowYouPlayTheGame. We will talk to everybody, God willing, in just a few short weeks. Until then, treat each other with respect. How You Play the Game is a production of the OSIP Foundation, Incorporated. The producer-engineer of this episode is Sean Ryan. Music by Soundspring Studio. The executive producer of How You Play the Game is Jack Furlong. For more information, visit osipfoundation.org.